third man factor is the name given to a phenomenon that has affected many polar explorers, mountain climbers, shipwreck survivors, and solo sailors. The phenomenon refers to the hallucinatory experience of believing an incorporeal third party has joined you during a period of hardship. Sir Ernest Shackleton was an Arctic explorer who described this phenomenon in his 1919 book, South. According to Shackleton, him and his two companions got stranded in pack ice during an Arctic expedition, and while they trekked across the endless mountains and glaciers, it seemed to him that there were 4 men in their group rather than 3. His admission inspired other survivors of extreme conditions to come forward sharing similar experiences. In more recent years, other people have shared their stories about the third man factor, including mountain climber Reinhold Messner and polar explorers Peter Hillary and Anne Bancroft. In 1988, a man named Joe Thompson published a book called Touching the Void, which told the story of a near-death experience he had while in the Peruvian Andes. According to Thompson, after sustaining an injury, a disembodied voice encouraged him to crawl back to base camp. Some scientists have suggested that the third man factor could be a psychological coping mechanism for extreme and traumatic conditions. Another theory suggests that the phenomenon could be a result of the bicameral mentality theory, which suggests that part of the brain is responsible for speaking and giving directions while the other part is responsible for obeying. Even though this phenomenon is not exclusive to Antarctica, Arctic explorers are one of the groups who are most likely to be affected by it. Let's just hope that nobody watching this video is ever in a situation where they experience the third man factor. Antarctica is one of the most inhospitable places in the world, and as such, it is home to many dead bodies and skeletal remains. In the 1980s, Chilean researchers discovered the oldest set of bones ever found on the continent. They determined that the remains had been lying on the shore for 175 years, and they had belonged to a woman who was 21 years old when she died. She was an indigenous Chilean, and the period of time in which scientists estimated she arrived on Antarctica would make her one of the first people to ever set foot on the continent. One of the big questions regarding the woman's death was how she got to Antarctica in the first place. Traditional Chilean canoes would not have been able to make a journey from South America to Antarctica. One theory was that she may have been a guide for a group of sealers, but it was practically unheard of for women to be taken on sealing journeys back then. To this day, the circumstances surrounding the woman's life and death are unknown. Another example of Antarctica's unforgiving conditions was the 1912 expedition led by Robert Falcon Scott. A British team of over 60 men reached the South Pole on January 17th to find that they were not the first people who had achieved that goal. Unfortunately, their journey would only get worse from there. During their return trip, the first man to die was Edgar Evans, who believed he was holding the rest of the team back because of his weakness. Evans left the group to die on his own so that everyone else could make it back. Sadly, several more men would die before the journey's end. Lawrence Oates was the second casualty. Evans and Oates' bodies were never found, but the corpses of Scott, Edward Wilson, and Henry Bowers were all found by a search party several months after the expedition. Their bodies were covered with snow and left where they lay. The last example I'll leave you with occurred on October 14th of 1965 when 4 men were riding a muskeg tractor across the desolate Antarctic tundra. The tractor was designed to haul people and supplies across the ice, and 3 of its crew were in the cab while the 4th member sat on a sledge behind the tractor with a group of huskies that were trailing behind. The snow was obscuring the driver's view, and he didn't see the crevasse in front of them until it was too late. John Ross, the crew member who was in the sledge behind the tractor, was wrapped up so tightly in a balaclava that he didn't even hear the accident happen. When he felt the sledge stop moving, he looked in the direction of the muskeg and saw nothing. It had simply disappeared. The only thing he could see was the first sledge wedged in the top of a crevasse. The tractor had fallen approximately 100 feet below the surface of the ice. Ross shouted down to his fellow crew members, but he received nothing in response. He continued shouting for another 20 minutes before he finally heard a reply. Jerry Bailey shouted to Ross that the other 2 crew members were both dead and he himself was, quote-unquote, all smashed up, and he couldn't move. Ross attempted to climb down the crevasse against the warnings of Bailey, but he ultimately failed. At some point during the horrific ordeal, Bailey suddenly stopped communicating with Ross. Then, out of nowhere, Ross heard a blood-curdling scream from the crevasse, and then complete silence. Permafrost is a layer of soil or rock that has been frozen for thousands of years, if not longer. Permafrost covers roughly 24% of landmass surfaces in the northern hemisphere, but climate change has been causing large amounts of this frozen layer to melt. This melting has resulted in the discovery of many fossilized objects, including wood from a time when the coldest regions on Earth were covered by warm jungles. However, the creepiest things scientists have found in the melting layer are viruses. There have been numerous instances of scientists finding viruses that were dormant for thousands of years before climate change revealed them. For example, scientists successfully revived a Pandora virus that is 48,500 years old from the Siberian permafrost. In 2014, a group of scientists uncovered and revived a 30,000-year-old Pandora virus. More recently, that same group of scientists wrote a paper describing 7 virus samples they had collected from permafrost. These viruses are generally not a threat to public health because the samples are incredibly rare, not to mention that they're in the possession of scientists and have a very low possibility of infecting anyone. However, that doesn't mean there can't possibly be any negative effects from melting permafrost uncovering viruses. In 2016, a heat wave in Russia thawed out a 75-year-old reindeer carcass that was infected with anthrax. Dozens of people were hospitalized after they became infected, and one child even perished. Researchers are warning that accidents like this one are going to become more frequent over time because of climate change. It's chilling to think that so many potentially deadly viruses are lurking in the ice, waiting to be thawed out. Hopefully we can prevent them from causing any widespread pandemics.